Thank you. Thank you, Mario. Welcome everybody to Lessons from Sustainability Trailblazers. If you don't already know, this webinar is sponsored by Aluminary Network. It's a networking app for alums of top business schools. For more information on Aluminary, if you're interested, you can look at their LinkedIn page or talk to Mario, who's the founder and of course is on the call today. Next slide. Just a quick word about me. My name is Benjamin Kessler. I'm a writer and editor helping to bridge the gap between business research and practice. I was managing editor of INSEAD Knowledge. I'm now employed by George Mason University School of Business in Northern Virginia. Next. Just the quick housekeeping rules for today. As you see when you join the call, the default is that your mic is off and your camera, it can be put on if you want, or feel free to turn it off if you're more comfortable with that. It shouldn't affect your experience at all. So we have the questions that were submitted by people who registered. Thank you for doing that. But we also welcome you to put questions in the chat as we go. We'll be monitoring the chat and those questions will be incorporated into the Q&A at the end. And we've allotted a good amount of time for that. So we should be able to get to many of the pertinent questions that you have. In addition, Elisabet is going to be asking a few questions of you and you can put your answers into the chat. Again, the more responses we get, the better the dialogue will be. So please, please, please engage with us when those questions come out. Here's a fun little note. All the attendees on the call today are entered automatically to win a physical copy of Elisabet's book, Better Business, Better Future. We'll be talking a little bit more about the ideas in that book. And the winner will be randomly selected and notified after the webinar has concluded. As you see, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be sent out in the coming days. Next. So let me introduce today's speaker. Elisabet Lagerstedt is a senior executive consultant, advisor, and coach, and an experienced facilitator of strategy, innovation, and transformation. She is also the founder and principal of Future Navigators. Her clients are CEOs, C-level executives, and boards of directors aiming for strategic and transformational change. She has worked with and in responsible companies across several industries, categories, and geographies. In her early career, she was responsible for one of Sweden's first and leading sustainability brands, which opened her eyes to avenues beyond business as usual. She is the author of 2 books. The first book from 2018, I will not attempt to pronounce this because I don't want to insult the Swedish attendees, but Elisabet informs me that the title translates in English to Navigate into the Future. And her new book, Better Business, Better Future, is available in English. And as I said, this talk is largely drawn from ideas in that book. Next. So let's just run through what was promised in the webinar invitation, what we're going to do to take you beyond business as usual and share lessons from sustainability trailblazers. That's kind of the top line. And getting into some of the conceptual meat of the discussion. We will decode better business, touch on the evolution of conscious leadership, and the emerging paradigm of regenerative business. So we're really going from a past, present, and future perspective on the sustainability revolution. Everything to get fit for the decade to come and accelerate the co-creation of a better future. And we'll be digging deeper into all of these terms and topics, and we hope to have a really stimulating discussion at the end. As I've said, we've left aside a lot of time for that. So if you are curious about anything you're hearing, please put it into the chat and it'll get incorporated into the Q&A. So without any further ado, let me hand the floor over to Elisabet.
Thank you, Ben. And thanks so much to you as well, Mario, for having us here. That's such a great opportunity. Now, lessons from Sustainability Trailblazers. Well, we're going to start by just exploring what brought me here. And my journey in this field, as Ben mentioned, actually dates back to 1990s, to the late 1990s. And sustainability has not been, at that point, the field of my expertise. But it's always been there. And it's not till about the last 5 years that I've really dug deep to understand what is happening. And that comes from a very fundamental question. How can I make a meaningful difference as a business leader with a focus that I've had on innovation, strategy and transformation? And how can I best utilize that experience for the good of my children and coming generations? And how can I help business leaders navigate what is going on to capture this vast potential and become a force of good? So just for you to get a bit of a feeling of why am I doing this and what are my drivers? So for the book specifically, the answer to me when I have a question is actually to deep dive into it. So what I did here was to utilize my background to both access, contacts, and decode the strategies and practices of a few or 40 actually companies with Sustainability Trailblazer, what could you call that, elements. So in studying these, I went through 200 plus articles, reports, and books. I looked into 40 organizations of different types, sizes, and industries, not just the giant ones, but also some of the smaller ones. Not the very small ones, but large size and a few mid-size. I did 6 deep dives into Patagonia, Interface, Unilever, IKEA, Ørsted, and Oatly to learn from their respective businesses and sustainability journeys over time. That is what has happened over the past 25 years. And I've also had a number of exploratory and super interesting dialogues with senior leaders. So this discussion needs to start with a simple definition. What is it that we're talking about? So that we all agree on the definition of this day. In short, we're going to use the definition of sustainability that is taken from the Brundtland Commission, the UN Brundtland Commission in 1987. And that is very shortly that sustainability means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And as you see, that fits quite well where I'm into as to my own interests. So what is going on around us? Why is this so important and becoming so important? In short, the sustainability revolution is happening. That's what's happening. And it won't go away. I think that's a very simple message. This is something you will need to learn to surf. And you cannot stop the waves, as Jon Kabat-Zinn says, but you can learn to surf. And I think that's what we want to bring with us here. Why is that then? Well, over the next 100 years, we're going to see even more change than we have over the past 20,000 years, at least as to Peter Diamantis, who is one of the founders of Singularity University. And on the World Economic Forum, they say that like the digital revolution that has preceded this sustainability revolution actually promises to change everything. And just as with digital, you know what has happened there over time? Companies are moving too slowly and taking small incremental steps rather than really taking that radical rethink that is necessary and important. I want you to have that in mind. So the question is how we ended up here in having to learn how to surf this massive wave. And you could categorize it as one massive wave or a series of waves. I would probably say it's a series of waves and that the waves right now are getting bigger and more difficult to handle. And my interpretation of what's going on is this. Because the science community has warned of the consequences of the industrialization and modern life for more than 50 years. And the rest of us haven't really listened, right? And the business community haven't really listened. So we're right now in a place where we need to act, and we need to act now. And what I want to do is to really quickly run you through a couple of slides so that we have a common picture of the background and what got us here before we actually go into look at the practices that has evolved and are now present in the front lines. So from a historical perspective, we live in unprecedented times. These show, these two graphs, first the world GDP over the last 2 millennia, and the other one, the world population growth over the last 12,000 years. And as you can see, it has pretty recently exploded. And that in turn has created a great acceleration of a number of trends. So from the 1950s, sort of, we're seeing a number of changes in a number of fields that show exponential patterns. And I would like for you to check out the report, The Trajectory of the Anthropocene, the Great Acceleration, if you're interested. We will forward the links here to everything, to all the sources I'm talking to. We will forward that in a later email, right, Marjo? So instead of talking more about this and the details, I just want to give you a feeling of what's going on. So things are exploding or have exploded since the 1950s, and the trajectory is still an upwards movement. And this has left us with a massive footprint. And we're now even calling the period that we live in the age of the Anthropocene, which is a period in time where humans actually shape the globe rather than nature as it has been before. And the challenge with this is that several researchers are now hollering actually that we're already way beyond the planetary boundaries in several places. And also it's not only the ecological ceiling of the planet that is challenging us, but also the social foundation, and they go together. Everything is based on the ecological ceiling. The social foundation rests on that, and on that we have business. So if the ecological ceiling and the social foundation is not in place, it will be very hard for us to run businesses going forward. What I find so interesting is that in all of this mess that we have created the past generations, and I've contributed over the past 25 years, the world of business is actually really well equipped to find and co-create solutions for some of these immense challenges. And we can do that through our creativity, our ingenuity, and the resources that we can so often call forth better and more effectively than many other human organizations. So there is a potential in making sure that business is involved in actually solving some of these problems that we have co-created. The question is again, and I saw that when you registered, that some of you have questions about, but how do we get our business leaders, the senior business leaders along, those that are still sort of ignoring this? Maybe they don't have the capacity, the mind space to take it in. They have too much to think about already. My suggestion to you would be show them the money. That's what normally helps. And in this case, I'm going to ask you a question first. And I would like for you to put, just a guesstimate, quick guesstimate in the chat. And the question is the following. Do you know what the business potential in addressing this crisis is in US dollars? From the hip, give it a shot. What is the business potential we're talking about? And Ben, you are going to monitor.
Yes.
If there are anything popping up there on the screen. Is someone bold enough?
Yeah, let's do it. I see 10 trillion US dollars. Someone says huge. Do we think it's more? Another 10 trillion. Someone says it's measured in trillions, 27 trillion. Yes, globally. Someone's asking if it's globally. Yeah. This is the global business opportunity that we're talking about. What's the magnitude?
Yeah.
So it's in that 10 to 27 trillion range. Again, a huge. Anyone say it's smaller? It's about the value of our planet Earth. Hard to place a value on that.
Yeah, I'm so happy you said that. The thing is that talking like that to a seasoned business leader who's not been trained in that, but has a master's focusing on traditional business measures doesn't help. That's what I've experienced over time. And showing the money helps actually creating an interest for this. So that's part of the exercise, right? But you are spot on here. You've done your homework, guys. I'm so impressed. So what we're seeing here is a span from 4.5 trillion from a transition to a circular economy represented by 2030, source Accenture, to a 26 trillion opportunity from the new climate economy report, which actually also Paul Polman has participated in crafting or drafting. So obviously a huge opportunity. And while preparing for this exercise, we discussed how much would this compare to countries? You know, can we touch how much this is? It's huge, but what are we talking about? And just to compare to the total gross domestic product of countries during 2020, we're saying Germany had $4 trillion US, Japan 5, China 15, and the US $21 trillion. So it's equivalent to actually adding another China or US to the market in added value, so to say. Of course, some companies will not survive this transformation and will need to, as Schumpeter's, historic process, probably go down, but something else is appearing. And I would like to talk a bit about that, because what I'm sensing when looking towards the horizon is that there seemed to be a paradigm shift on the way. And the old ways of doing business, coming from this short-termism driven by the financial market with a focus on optimizing short-term profits, the take, make, dispose logic, the purpose being maximizing short-term profits for shareholders, and traditional corporate responsibility, more of an add-on to reduce risk and safeguard reputation, that is somehow evolving into something else. And we're on that journey as we speak. And what I'm seeing evolving in the horizon is a long-termism, which is really encouraging. And it's not only seen by owners in different places and startups and impact investors, but it's also seen in the financial markets to protect long-term investments, because they've realized there is a risk in being focused on the short term, at least when we come to this field. We're seeing that the purpose of business is evolving into a thought of being there to advance the prosperity of humanity within the boundaries set by nature. A bit idealistic, but still a beautiful thought, right? And maybe, or even possibly, the only thing that we can do to actually live on this finite planet and prosper going forward, right? And then we're talking about a circular, regenerative, and more equitable business and operating model. They will be multiple. There is not one solution for that, but in that direction. And here in this evolving paradigm, we're also seeing sustainability being a fully integrated part of business purpose, strategy, business model, value chain, and offering in what we do. And also leadership, actually, because this will also take a transformation of leadership that we will talk a bit about later today. And what I'm also seeing is that there are new models for collaboration based on mutual interest and a higher good that is evolving. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be easy. What I'm seeing is a paradigm paralysis sort of in the middle. That may be the reason why people actually put their heads in the ground, because they know they have been trained. We have been trained in the old business paradigm, right? We don't really know how to act in the evolving business paradigm. So what happens? We become paralyzed. There is no map of the future, but we know what we're doing now. So one of the challenges I put to myself was, what could these evolving, not only the evolving paradigm, is there something in between that we can actually be more pragmatic about that can help us on the way? And there is. And in my language, I call that better business. So if business as usual is the old business paradigm, and the evolving paradigm long-term in the horizon, I'm talking between 2040, 2050, that's not so long-term, but still in a regular business language focused on 1 to 5 years, that's pretty long. And what I'm talking about in between is what I call better business. You could also talk about it in the form of having a long-term focus, creating share value for stakeholders, being purpose-driven and for profit for sure, as the others as well, focusing on the business ecosystem, not only the transactional business environment, being purpose-driven and aiming to minimize cost in terms of social and ecological impact. And then I'm not talking minimize cost, I'm talking about minimize the footprint, the social cost and the ecological footprint, right? And then also when you look at the sustainability issue per se, a focus on integrating that into purpose and strategy and becoming a sustainable company with systematic efforts taken to make the current offer more sustainable, more circular, and opening opportunities in value propositions, business models and operating models. So it's not going the full way, it's somewhere in between. And the good thing with that, guys, is that there are actually companies active in that avenue already, meaning there are people and companies to learn from for the rest of us that are not really there yet. So the question is then, what is that we can learn from these trailblazers? What are we talking about? So my first question to you is actually, what type of companies am I talking about? The question, Ben, which you will moderate there, is which are considered to be the top 10 companies integrating sustainability into their core? I'm not, suggesting you should know this by heart, but just a feeling. What type of companies are you seeing mentioned in the news, in media in general, in business media, in relation to being really good at this? Can we have some guesses in the chat?
First guess is coming in: Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Tesla, IT, Patagonia, another Patagonia, Ben & Jerry, energy, B corporations, yes, of course, automobile industry, aviation. This is all over the map.
All right.
Unilever, Danone, pretty big names.
All right.
L'Oreal, Nestle. Emerging new sustainable business models. So startups,
Sure.
SMEs,
Absolutely.
they may not be the
Impact.
top 10, but they're the ones getting the results.
Yeah.
Bill Gates and his efforts.
For sure.
Fortesque.
All right. Should we stop there, or do you have one more or two coming in?
I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Vinod Khosla, Khosla Ventures. Interface. Houdini.
Okay, Swedish one.
So it's quite global.
Yeah. So what
Tata
I want to
Group.
do, yeah. All right. So we'll just, I think you did well there. A bit all over, but you're in the right direction for sure. Let's see what the list says. In this list, this is based on GlobeScan's survey, sustainability survey in 2020. It moved slightly across the years, but not, too much. 700 experts asked about how they perceive, who they perceive to be in the front line here. And since this is the field I'm interested in, who are really good at integrating that, and those are the ones I consider having done their job, not only as an add-on or as an ESG measure, but actually really added this to their overall business or into their overall business and integrated it. I feel that Unilever is an interesting profile here, and they're definitely top of the list, based a lot on Paul Polman. They have lost a bit of their reputation since he left, but they're still pretty high up. Patagonia, for sure. They've been on this journey since the mid-1990s, even though they go back even to the 1970s. So they actually switched strategy and moved into a more sustainable angle after a crisis, which few know. IKEA, one of those. They did not start up as a sustainable company, and they are a very consumer-driven company, built on consumption and take, make, dispose. I'm going to come back to that, but they are considered they are considered to be doing a really, really good job in integrating this, and they are. Interface came up. Amazingly interesting story about a founder with a newfound passion in 1994, an epiphany actually, that he decided to pursue in his company, which created immense or really super interesting lessons for us. And then we have Natura, which is a Latin American company, which includes some interesting cosmetic brands. And of course, Danone, Tesla, Nestle, Microsoft, and Ørsted. And why I highlighted a few of those was because some of them I've really been able to get close to and to track, if I may say so, and focus on over time. And I'm talking about in between 10 and 25 years to try and pull the journey out for you. I actually worked with Unilever myself in 1995, which is exactly the same year as they actually more or less started the journey. Interesting in itself. So one of the things I found about these guys and the study I did of the whole study that I performed is that the trailblazers could go through this as an evolution over time, 10 to 20 years. Some of them, as Ørsted, for instance, have done this as a very clear strategic shift. Some of the others have too, actually, but it's been more evolutionary. What I'm sensing now is that we're having less time to act. And with any trend, when you have less time to act, it eventually becomes a shock and a crisis, right? When you need to act because you're asked or demanded to act by everyone from authorities to customers and others, meaning you really, really need to change your agenda. So the longer you wait, the more of a shock this may actually turn into for companies. What the other lesson I learned was that these trailblazers seem to be playing on 3 playing fields. In a rather organized matter, they're not really till this being discussed, they're not drawing it like this for me. But when I listen to them and draw back and have a discussion and mirror back what they're saying, this is pretty much it. That is, we're working on the organization itself, but also on our business ecosystem, as well as the world and society. And interestingly, I find that they seem to be working on the same type of, what should I say, with the same type of approaches or initiatives or even strategic intents on the different levels. And to simplify that immensely, I've translated that into 5 steps. On the organizational level, I'm seeing first a very strong focus on laying a solid foundation, that is doing things right? The other one is explore and innovate, where things are taken to the next level regarding your offer and business model. And then comes integrating to the core. I'll talk a bit about that and bring out Patagonia as an example. You then go up to the next level, the business ecosystem. And then when you're there, it's all about upgrading your ecosystem, helping that ecosystem to transform. And finally, the top level here is about collaborating to change the world. And what I've seen with the Trailblazers is that they're actually active and they have programs that go into all of these different areas. They don't structure it like this, but if you put it together and thematize it, that's what you see, right? So I'm going to take you through one of these at the time. And we're going to start with the first level as the first important learning here about laying that solid foundation. What are we talking about? Well, first of all, this is what you would consider traditional sustainability work in most organizations. But here they do that they take that to a new level. They work systematically to understand and address stakeholder needs. They conduct yearly materiality analysis, set ambitious goals, even moonshots, and develop and implement relevant programs to address the identified challenges. In the book, I have several examples, partly from Ørsted, but also from Unilever, that shows how they, in a very structured manner, transparently work on this. They also ensure strong governance. And I think that's really important because that is also what is necessary to be able to transparently report on what you're doing at any chosen standard. And the standard of these guys are, of course, the highest standards. The example I would like to showcase here is actually what Interface did in 1994. Because, and these are, someone mentioned it, it's a, for those who don't know Interface, it's a US carpet manufacturer. Doesn't sound like a sustainability trailblazers to most people, but it really, really is. And it all started with their founder having an epiphany and deciding to commit to being the first environmentally stable and ultimately restorative company. So they put up, and that was in his mind most. So what happened in the company is that they put a group of 7 engineers on trying to solve the challenges. And they came up after having discussed this with a group of experts, outside experts. They came up with a number of goals. I think it was 7 goals. And those would be called moonshots today because they were tremendously, tremendously hard to reach. What they decided in 1994 was to reach net zero carbon in 2020. And they also decided that by then they would have reached net zero waste, zero processed water use, and more, right? You get the feeling. They were way ahead of their time. And the interesting thing is that they reached all this. They worked so systematically with an engineering perspective, not sustainability experts. They brought in the sustainability experts from the outside in this case, and worked with an engineering perspective on actually making sure that throughout their, I would say, their production system, which was their focus, actually managed to reach these results. Now they have reloaded their goals and are going for even higher ones. But I just wanted to give you a feeling of what you can actually accomplish with a set of 7 engineers when you aspire to lay a solid foundation, at least in those days, So the next level, here you need a completely different set of competences. We're not talking about the sustainability type of folk that you would see today in most companies. Here we're talking about the design thinking focused innovation profiles that are out exploring new opportunities in the marketplace. And what I see as interesting in these trailblazers is that they have started, rather than just focusing on human needs and finding a way of profitably attending to those, they also start focusing on how to include solutions for the world's wicked problems and creating impact business models that include somehow useful tech or other enablers, and find the sweet spot in between these 4 different areas in a nice way. An interesting example I have here from the book is IKEA. They focus on exploration for sure, and innovation and experimentation with specifically circular business models, products and services to explore and innovate in a field where they actually don't come from. They come from the take, make, dispose logic, right? And they're moving into something that is fully circular, at least in their minds. So how do you do that? Well, you put your best innovation people on it to just, first of all, work on what we already have and transform that as far as is possible. And then thinking about how do we go forward from here? And they're really transparent with their practices. You can actually download some of their guides online if you search for IKEA circular business. The other thing that they're doing is an innovation hub, which has become really popular. In this case, it's for breakthrough innovations linked to global trends and wicked problems, based in Copenhagen, also attracting a lot of interesting topics that they're trying to approach with out of the box thinking, I would say. So this takes us to the next level within still the organizational perspective, and that is integrating sustainability into the very core. And in this case, what I'm seeing here is But these guys tend to integrate sustainability into that core. They integrate it with a higher purpose. The higher purpose becomes their North Star, right? Why we exist on this planet at all. What is it that we should contribute with? What are our values, our culture, the strategy that we do, the business model, offering and operating model, all are infused completely by their focus on sustainability. I wouldn't say that sustainability comes first for most of these. Actually, it's been added on afterwards, but it's been integrated into the core over the years as the company has evolved. And interestingly, all of the elements of the organization is today built around that higher purpose that I'm sensing and seeing. And I want to give you a bit of a feeling how Patagonia, for instance, does this. So in the center, you have the why, the higher purpose, why we are in business at all. On the what, you have your value proposition, what you offer. You have the who, the stakeholders, and who you create value for. You have the where we do that, where are we active, markets and geographies, and you have your how, the operating model and how value is created. And Patagonia has done this tremendously well. Now they've been on this bus for a long time, and their reason to exist is to save their home planet. That's not why they started the business. That's not what happened when they started. That wasn't the purpose, but it has evolved over time and really, really strongly now it encapsulates the wish and the focus on saving the home planet, which is kind of strange, actually, because they know still that they actually are a work in progress. They still work, they still extract resources and are and add to degeneration rather than regeneration, but they are exploring regenerative practices as they go. So they're very much aware of their contribution, both negative and positive. And they've included this throughout their model in the what they offer, in the who they serve, planet and society and conscious consumers, in where they are at, and how, and also then, of course, how they operate with the activist mindset, B Corp status since 2012, continuously improving, and having an extremely high employee satisfaction and an extremely high engagement, all built around their why and high quality products in their specific target market. So I think they're doing a brilliant job, actually, in incorporating sustainability into their very core. Now, we're going to leave that and move on to the next level. Now we move into the green part of this system, that is the business ecosystem, which was the levels slightly beyond the organization, right? Not only the transactional system, but also anything, anyone you would be in contact with or throughout your industry and beyond, first or second degree. So here it's about helping to upgrade your ecosystem. And you could ask, why would you do that and how? First of all, it's about supporting, challenging and upgrading your whole industry and business ecosystem outside of your own direct control to support sustainable and even regenerative development, and also having a proactive PA agenda. For instance, sharing your insights and learnings in studies and reports and in meetings, standing up, doing webinars like I'm doing today to share your experiences, right? To help others learn and accelerate their own performance and change, not only for suppliers and suppliers of suppliers, but for competitors too, and others in the outside world. And why would you do that, you may ask? And there may be really good reasons for that. One of the most obvious reasons, I would say, you would find at a company, Norwegian company called Norsk Gjenvinning. I talked to their CEO about this, and it's also a very interesting HBR case, Harvard Business Review case written. I think it's even 2 cases about this, which shows how they decided strategically to collaborate with governments and authorities to clean up the waste and recycling industry in Norway. Obviously, they got new owners and a new CEO coming from the outside in, and they saw corruption. They saw that a lot of what was actually taken care of by the recycling industry already was shipped to Asia and ended up in the sea. And they saw a lot of other things that was wrong, completely wrong in their industry. So they actually came to the conclusion that the only way of handling this is not only dealing with our own strategy and our own pollution and our own way of dealing with this, but it's actually raising the bar for the whole industry to making sure that in this case, those that actually did it in a, what should I say, I wouldn't say black market way because it wasn't, but rather less sustainable way. They actually charged less, of course, but making sure that there was a standard, a minimum standard of operating that was important for all to follow. And then from there, build up the reputation of this industry, which is actually a really important part of the sustainability revolution going forward. So great cases, if you're curious, Norsk Gjenvinning on HBR. I will send you the link again. So guys, we've now moved up to the top level. What happens there? Well, in short, this is all about collaboration with others. It may be partners that you haven't even thought about before, or it may even be your competitors, other people in and businesses in your industry or outside of your industry that tend to the same system that you're working on. For instance, the food system, which spans across many industries. So here you also have the opportunity, as Paul Polman did actually, to step up as a global thought leader on the global stage, taking on the hat of being that front runner that helps others step up to this challenge. Not many have reached that level, but there is definitely room for others to step into his shoes, since he now, since a few years, has left Unilever and is working as a consultant on the side. Still very active, but there for sure is room. So what I'm seeing here, depending on the size of the company, an impact, let me say it this way, a startup might actually start on this level, saying we want to change the world. That is our ultimate purpose of our business, and we want to collaborate to actually create this change. As a large organization, it's not that easy, because if you have that attempt, if you attempt that without having your foundation in place, you get to become a purpose washer and a greenwasher, right? And you don't want to be that. That's a big risk. So in order to do this authentically, you need to think through and make sure that you have, that you don't have a lot of things, falling out your wardrobe every time you open up, but that you have cleaned out and that you have that solid foundation in place. And two companies, or a couple of companies I would like to mention here that stands out for engagement on this level is Patagonia, first of all, who have chosen a quite different approach than Unilever and Danone, for instance. Patagonia has engaged early on in corporate activism to support a multitude of grassroots movements in very different fields for decades. And that's really inspirational. They also have a foundation for that, and they support several other foundations. Now, Unilever and Danone and several others in the food service industry, which I told you, well, they are huge companies. They have a major footprint, even though they are very focused on becoming sustainable, and they have reached rather far on the journey compared to many others. They are still responsible for actually creating a degenerative agricultural system. And they have realized that, so that they're breaking the agricultural system down. And what they have realized is that if we want to continue this, that we do, we need to work to create together a regenerative food system. If we don't, we will probably not be able to feed the planet in a couple of decades. So they have a really interesting initiative going on since 2019. Please check it out. I thought it was interesting, but it also shows that smaller companies with a private owner like Patagonia can work from a more of a activist perspective than large companies. looking at Unilever and Danone, they're giants, and coming together means that they can't move very quickly. This is where I feel that impact investors and startups have a major role to play, because they can put pressure on the incumbents to speed this process up. And it is happening for sure in very many industries, which I find is really, really promising. So guys, for me, this means summarizing the learnings on a high level, that these guys have really realized that the secret of change is to focus all of your energy, not on fighting the old, but on building the new, and incorporating that in their business models, into their purposes and into their strategies. And they're doing that really, really well. Some of them, not all, but some of them have also realized that it starts with themselves. And now I'm not talking about anything but the actual business leader. And here I'm talking about you and us, because leadership as usual is as unsustainable as business as usual. And I'm going to introduce to you a term which is called vertical leadership development. And I'm going to propose that that is what will be needed to increase our leadership capacity to deal with these increasing complexities, and the focus on moving from a focus on me and my ego to we and us, and what is important for us as a humanity and the planet. And I'm proposing that we will not be able to reach the higher levels here without that actual change. And just a few words about what I'm talking about here. I'm pulling this from a methodology called the stage shift approach, which I'm certified in myself as a coach. And one of the things we talk about there are the different development steps of adults. Here I've just chosen to pick out two, and those, the achievist profile is one of those profiles that is very common in the business world today on a leadership level. A typical achievist is competitive, has self-interest, a large ego, slightly manipulative, focus on more is better, unilateral power, it's more me than you. And that also means that the achievist has certain limits. One of the limits that research has shown, leadership research has shown, is that that profile can't really comprehend the complexities of what's going on, because you don't focus outside of your own organization. You focus on that and your transactional environment, just like business as usual. In order to be able to focusing beyond your organization and out in the outside system, you need to level up as a leader. Good news is that that is definitely possible. We have far too few synergists. If, as shown in leadership research, they're still a minority, but we're seeing a flow from achievists into synergists, and there are methods for actually developing your ego into that level through coaching. So a synergist leader would rather be characterized with a presence of mind to transcend that turmoil of the VUCA world, to set aspirations, inspire stakeholders, understand their systems, trust emergence, and reinvent and transform their organizations. And they're so much more efficient, leadership research has shown, at transforming organizations and ecosystems than achievists attempting the same thing. They actually normally fail, which is why this is so important. Now, I have come to the end of the sharing of the learnings, and I would just like to bring up the book again. I haven't shown it, have I? Would like to bring up the book and say there is more information in the book. Please check it out. I'll give you the link to my website, the author website, so you can check it out yourself. But what did we promise, Ben? You said something here in the beginning about our promise.
Yes. So yeah, this was take you beyond business as usual, share lessons from Sustainability Trailblazers, decoding better business, touching on the evolution of conscious leadership, the emerging paradigm of regenerative business, getting fit for the decade to come, accelerating the co-creation of a better future. So that's the large mission of this. And I think we've conveyed what that entails, as well as some examples of companies that are taking steps to get there. I mean, as you've said, it's not a short-term one and done timeline measured in months. I mean, we're talking years, if not decades. But the journey has to start somewhere, and that's where the distinction between better business and regenerative business really comes in.
For sure, for sure. And definitely the distinction between business as usual and better business, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So if you want to, before we move into the discussions and Q&As, just want to give you a few thoughts about going deeper. Mario, I know you will be sending out more information within the next week with the webinar recording and the links to the sources referred to in this webinar, right? And
Totally.
Please also visit, perfect, Mario. And please visit elisabetlagerstedt.com, Elisabet without an H, Lagerstedt.com, to learn more about the book, All Better Business. I have a whole webpage dedicated for that. And you can there also download a self-assessment to compare your company to the Trailblazers on those 5 steps that you just saw. And it's free. So download and enjoy, and get back to me if you get stuck. And with any feedback, I would love that too, for sure. So, Ben, we have reached the magic time limit here. Now we want to hear from you and the audience. What sort of questions has popped up? What is there to discuss, and how long will we be going today?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, we have 20 minutes left in the official runtime of this, and we'll see whether we want to go a little bit over. I think we have the flexibility to do that if people want to stay on for a few minutes past, if the conversation is still rolling on. But yeah, we've had some really fascinating examples people have shared in the chat of some companies that have taken steps in this direction. So, I don't know whether we can download this chat and maybe include some of these links in the follow-up email, but this is definitely all worth sifting through. And I'm sure everybody has their own favorite examples, and we can talk more about where those fit into the conceptual frameworks that you lay out, both in this talk and in the book. But, to kick off the Q&A, I mean, we should start somewhere. And I feel like, this issue of vertical leadership developments and regenerative business and the link between those is really fascinating to me. But I wanted to kind of go back to a basic level, even like before we talk about sustainability, because with the VUCA world, the VUCA world, however you pronounce it, the world is ridden with crises, and there's, pandemics, potential wars that businesses have had to adapt to. The question of adaptation becomes paramount. And we know that leaders are smart, leaders are strategic, they think about the survival of their company and their career, and yet we know that the track record of many senior leaders in adapting to change is not so great. And you touch upon this a little bit in the book, which I thought was fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the main struggles are when leaders try to adapt to things like the sustainability revolution and the wicked problems you were describing in the talk? Why do leaders struggle to adapt to these things, even though they're so important?
Yeah, there are 2 things I want to bring up. And I have to say, that was a brilliant question, because I actually wrote about that in my last book. And that is something I am so fascinated by myself. And I think there is no easy answer. And I've come to several conclusions. Maybe the 2 easier conclusions would be, first of all, the success trap, meaning that as long as you're successful and the business model that you're running is not in a crisis, many business leaders don't pursue change till it's actually too late. And that is the super important dialogue about dual organizations, that is organizing yourself around the current business and the making that more efficient and effective and improving it ongoingly, and actually building for the future horizons your future business. And it may not be only one, but several, right? I know Alexander Osterwalder is talking about this. It comes from Michael Tushman and O'Reilly at Stanford and Harvard. And they've done a huge job about that for about 40 years, I believe, of their research. They've spent their whole research lives on it. And they've seen over time that happening again and again, that people get stuck in what already works, and that they start the second journey too late. And I'm seeing it repeat still. I'm seeing it repeating all over the place, for sure. And even companies, if you go back to companies outside of the sustainability field, you go back and look at digitization, what happened there? You have the Kodak case, for instance.
Yeah.
And they actually were onto the digitization journey, but failed to continue investing in it because the margins were so much lower than in their core business. So they actually didn't focus on it. And obviously then things happened and they went out of business, right?
Yeah.
As others in the industry did the right thing and evolved over time, even though they also were through a crisis. But I think the word crisis, unfortunately, is the best predictor here of things happening. As long as you're not meeting some sort of an internal crisis based on external forces or internal forces, things tend to not happen. That's what I call the success trap.
Well, that's very interesting to me. I mean, one question that came in from the people who registered was, it really stuck out to me, what kind of future do these business as usual companies have? I mean, those that are kind of stuck in the current traditional paradigm and can't seem to find their way forward. Do you think that, they have a staying power? I mean, for larger companies, how much is that resource advantage going to be eroded by a failure to evolve or adapt?
I think this question is important and relevant for all companies. And I think the most obvious answer is that renewal is continuous. It cannot just, you won't go from one stage to the other normally. Renewal needs to happen ongoingly, dual organization. Does that answer your question, or were you looking for something else?
No, I mean, I think that definitely hints. I mean, it's no one has a crystal ball, but it seems to me that if you want momentum and competitive advantage, you're much more likely to find it if you're with the curve, surfing the wave, as it were, as you see in the slide, rather than being either shrinking from it or bowled under by it. So it may not be that the companies that are laggards are going to go down in flames, but they're certainly going to lose some of their mojo. And if you want to keep your momentum, it's better to be aware of these trends. I want to get into some more of the questions that were sent in, but one thing that I'm burning to ask you is, I was really surprised, even though I knew a little bit about Interface, that they had committed to net zero in 1994 in the mid 90s. That's extreme prescience for a company. I wonder if you have anything to say about that. I mean, how does a company become future focused to the degree that they can see trends happening decades out?
Yeah, well, I'm going to stick with Interface here. There are several answers to that question. You could talk about Rita McGrath's book here if you want to, Seeing Around Corners, but I'm not going to go in there. I'm not going to go into that direction. I'm rather going to focus on Interface because it's a brilliant example. And if you go back to what happened, they were very much a business as usual company. And what happened was that their owner at the time, their founder, he was still the CEO in his early 60s or mid 60s. And he was out at a customer visit and got a question. And that question was pretty much, what are you doing for the environment? And this was already 1994 in the US, which was a quite progressive customer, obviously. And he started talking a bit, but he realized that he didn't really have anything to say. So he was kind of just, coming up with stuff. And when he came back home, he brought some of the engineers together and talked to them. And what do we have here? Because this customer thinks this is really important. So customer driven, right? That's what comes up. And obviously they didn't have much. So they decided to pull together a meeting to discuss this in a more structured manner. And he started preparing by reading a book. I think it's called The Ecology of Commerce. And what is described by himself in a video I've seen, and I've also talked to one of the people who worked very close to him in those years and have worked with the company in the management team all the time. And he describes it as, after having read that book, the founder came back completely changed. Suddenly, he seems to have had what's called an epiphany, right? It just became clear to him that what he'd been doing, meaning producing through a take, make, dispose logic, did not make sense. And that the consumption that he was, focusing on, and the sales he was focusing on, and the production he was focusing on, actually was extremely negative for the environment. And so he called up the author, more or less, invited him into the company, as I've understood it, and decided to pursue this path. And one of the first things that he did was to go to Wall Street to claim his new direction. And in 1994, I wouldn't say he was well received, right? So what happens is that his shares plummeted. The stock value was decimated, but still he was so convinced that something had to be done that he pulled together a smaller team, this seven engineers, which I've talked to one of them, to work on this together, to see how they could address this, and working together, then also creating a dream team of ecologists, actually another team of 7 to 10 people around that author, and helping them talk, finding out what was important to focus on, and drawing the map and setting these moonshots. And they started doing this undercover, actually, till they started reporting results. Because what happened, since they put engineers on it, was that they came back with amazing cost savings, which they hadn't really seen coming, by doing, by being more focused on the resource utilization. They could really, really help make the whole production process much more sustainable and much more effective. So then they could start talking about it, and then Wall Street became interested, and things took off, and they started sharing their practices in the US mainly, and has ever since. They're still focusing very much on their environmental part, not so much on the social part, which also shows on their ESG scores, which are not rocket high, but coming from a pure environmental approach and what they've done over the past 20 years, they've done amazing stuff.
There's so many interesting issues there. Definitely. I mean, this plays into one of the questions that I saw coming in through the chat, which, speaks to the question of how companies can sustain their efforts. I mean, this is a long road with Interface, and I know, knowing a little bit about their history, it was up and down, and they faced some difficulties with their business model and making it work. Making all the dollars and cents line up. In companies like IKEA and Unilever, how can they stay focused on sustainability and sustain it with perhaps some market and investor pressures that might take them the other way, or conventional paradigms to struggle against? How can companies like IKEA, Unilever keep their sustainability efforts on track over the long term?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that with a company example, and that will be Volvo Cars, right? And I talked to a really interesting lady who wrote a book in 1997. She was American, and I think that was one of the first books written from a business perspective on sustainability in the US. She co-wrote it with other authors, but Volvo was one of the companies that they interviewed. So she came over to Sweden, actually, to interview with a number of stakeholders there that could actually tell the story. And Volvo was at that time considered being in the very forefront of the sustainability movement for a larger company, I have to add. And when I talk to Volvo today, they're still very much focused on this, but they haven't focused on it as some of the others as a competitive advantage. They've kept it in the background and kept working on it, but that also means they have, what should I say? It has fallen out of people's, they're not top of mind when you think about a sustainability company, because they have not really included it, their sustainability focus, especially on the environmental side, in their communication to especially consumers, but also to other stakeholders. So they're definitely a good ESG player today, standard from that perspective, but they're not using sustainability as their main USP just as, to highlight that it can be used in different ways. What I've seen in those, if you go back, not only evolve over time, is that depending on how you communicate, because everything that you do communicates, right? And depending on how you communicate and what you decide will be your point of difference or differentiation, you're able to tell different stories, of course. So it all depends on also why you're doing what you're doing, of course. But I'm coming back, and I'm really boring now, Ben. I'm coming back to the need of continuous renewal. So if you want to keep ahead of the curve in the coming years, you need to renew yourself, to keep renewing yourself, to approach renewal through that dual system that I mentioned before. That is optimizing what you're doing, keep on improving that, but at the same time, looking into what will be our future business and our future bets.
We just got a really interesting example in the chat. The Sustainability Institute in Lyondok, South Africa, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, is a great example of transformative education anchored in sustainability. This issue of education is an important one. We're here in a webinar sponsored by Aluminary, which is obviously an alumni network for top business schools. So I wanted to know how you feel education can play a role here, not only in higher education, MBA programs, executive education, but also within companies. And if I may pack in another issue, because one of the questions that someone submitted had to do with educating the consumer. So what are your thoughts about how education can play a role here in the continuous renewal that we need?
Yeah, the role of education. Let me just think a bit. I'm coming to think about a few things. The first is, where is education on this map of sustainability? Where is the vortex, and where does this industry specifically land in relation to the center of the vortex? So if I look at different industries, you would typically have and see the energy industry in the very center of this vortex, where things now are spinning really, really fast, and they are in a transformation that is moving quickly, right? Then you have industries that are in adjacent places. I'm not sure what's going on here. Can you see something on my screen?
Yeah, something just popped up. I think you could just X out of that.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I could.
There you go.
Okay, sorry about that. So that's about where, where is the center of this vortex? Education is not primarily hit by this vortex, other than to a large extent the content that they actually teach. And there, I believe they have a massive potential in actually helping to transform not only the skill set, but also the mindset of future leaders. And I'm saying skill set and mindset because to me that those are different things. And it goes back to what I talked about earlier about vertical development. So what most educators do is to teach skills, hard skills. We know, different fields we get specialized on. But we don't get taught how to think, how to expand our mindset, and how to expand our perspectives. And they are related for sure, but it's like going up the elevator to see more of the world in elevating your mindset and elevating your perspectives. And I think actually I would challenge the education system not only to look into how to expand our skills, but also to expand their students' mindsets.
And there's a question of educating the consumer. I mean, and we can perhaps enlarge the question to ask, are consumers ready for this? We know that there is I would say, a minority of very vocal, militant, environmentally conscious consumers, more so in some countries than others. But on the whole, in the mass market sense, do you feel there is a groundswell that's sufficient, or do companies need to intervene and launch their own, perhaps, educational initiatives to get consumers ready for what they're preparing to offer?
I think this is a brilliant question, and I think the world is in different places. I think some consumers of the world are already in the front lines. They're demanding change, and I think others are all the way back to being laggards. That is, they don't even see the problem, and they don't have the need to change themselves or their own behavior or anyone else in that case when it comes to the field of sustainability. The interesting thing is to think about if the world move in different let's see, you have parts of the world that actually are in the front line. Sweden is such a country, Stockholm is such a city, Copenhagen is Denmark, Finland, you have Scandinavia, right? And we're rather progressive. And there are things I think you can think about and study to see what has happened here over time. There is, for instance, this customer group that I think was invented in the US, which is called LOHAS. I can't remember, which really tortures me, can't remember what that is short for, but it's supposed to be something about a lifestyle of sustainability and something, health and sustainability, I believe. And when when the LOHAS were invented, so to say, or seen as emerging, was in the mid-90s, even in the US, as a very small, as you said, activist group with a focus on sustainability and ecological products, organic, and so on and so forth. What has happened over time is that this group has shifted and they have grown. In Sweden today, 40% of all consumers can be categorized into that category.
Wow.
Now, that is value-wise. I would say that consumers act differently in different categories. So it's not as easy to say that it's, you know, that's what goes for all categories. But working with, actually, I come from a background in the mid and late 1990s from fabric detergents, where this customer group that you're talking about then it was considered a niche market. And today they're much more than a niche market, and it's still evolving and growing. And you can actually on the internet go in and check out LOHAS to see how those are developing on your markets. That would be an interesting exercise, I guess. LOHAS,
thank you.
LOHAS.
Thank you to Dan Kruger, who clarifies it stands for Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I do have one more question, and we're officially at time, but I do think we can maybe take a couple of more questions if that's okay, and close out the dialogue. I think there's still some interesting stuff floating out there that we haven't addressed. I mean, we could talk for a long time on this.
Yeah, for sure.
But if that's okay with people, we can extend a bit more, or if you need to jump off, please do so. You can check out the recording later. So, I mean, one question that came in, and again, we can enlarge it a little bit, because the question was about what role artists and creatives can play in promoting sustainability. And maybe let's look at artists, creatives, and other kind of unlikely stakeholders. Anything that you see that can collaborate with business. I mean, you've talked about collaboration as part of your framework, collaboration with, with your rivals, with startups, but what about with artists? What about with creatives? What about with other kinds of unlikely stakeholders with whom businesses have traditionally kept distance?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question, Ben. What that made me think of is, what role does art have in society? And it also makes me think about the role they could potentially play, or artists can potentially play here. And I'm spontaneously thinking about the huge opportunity to help create awareness about these issues that we have. Contemporary awareness in our society, in different groups of what is going on, in different subcultures, right? And I'm just seeing a huge potential to bring out a message that in writing is really complex, in a way through art that would be more, what can I say, intuitive. That may sound fluffy, but I do think there is a huge potential in actually addressing this in a creative way, using art or other types of creative methods. Of course, one creative method is design thinking, and that's a method I use myself and feel really comfortable with. And that's for innovating not only products and services, but also business models and systems, and the future of systems. And of course, that's also a more, what should I say, structured way to approach this. So you have the artsy way of doing it, and you have the more structured way of doing it, I guess. Good question.
Ideally, they should work together. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks very much. And, going again to some of the questions coming in through the chat, I mean, this again kind of plays into what you just said. Sonia asks, what role could open innovation play in this transformation? You talk about innovation kind of in general, but open innovation, crowdsourcing, collaborative, open source types of innovation, do you see a lot of potential there in over and above the role that open innovation has played up till now in promoting sustainability and the sustainability revolution?
Yeah, I think it's a huge potential in open innovation, and any cross-functional corporate collaboration and cooperation, I think, should be stimulated, because what happens when you bring together a group of people that normally don't work together, that has extremely different perspectives and backgrounds, is that new things are born, right? And you could do it with consumers, of course, but I'm coming from a perspective of bringing together stakeholders that are not traditionally considered to work within a specific category, for instance, to shine a light on a problem and brainstorm and work through design thinking methods and others to actually address a certain issue that is being highlighted. So I think it's a huge possibility. It's just to organize it that leaves some more there. But there is in the book, I have a great example from a foundation that's called Axe Foundation, situated in Stockholm, Sweden, that work actively with that from a foundational perspective, bringing people together to think about problems, which I actually consider open innovation. Yeah, because they're looking for concrete solutions, and that's what's coming out of their process, and it's described in the book, by the way.
Yeah, I should mention, I've read the book. It's full of detail. So if questions come to mind and you want clarification, we'll send out the email with for further reading. But the book itself is amazing further reading. So that's my endorsement, and it's sincere. So one question I wanted to make sure that we got to that was submitted had to do with that trade-off between long-term and short-term goals that you mentioned in an early slide. It's a key issue, obviously, because of the short-termism that especially publicly listed companies are exposed to is pretty extreme, as you know. But at the same time, a long-term perspective is absolutely required for the sustainability journey to take place. I mean, so how can companies manage that tension between the long-term and short-term imperatives, let's say? Yeah.
I think it's bigger than the actual company. I think it's a systemic issue. That is what the system demands of a CEO, for instance. But not going into that specifically, any company that wants to survive long term, not only through the 3 to 5 year tenure of the CEO, needs to tend to not only the short term, but the midterm and the long term. And what's evolving and what we're already seeing in those that actually mainly are owned by private owners like IKEA, they do already have a generational perspective. And the founder there used to say that he wanted his company to survive beyond 100 years and 200 years. So that's the sort of perspective you take instead of having a next quarter perspective, which is the very short term in its essence. And I think, unfortunately, we will need to live with the trade-offs for any time going forward, because there is such a thing as cash, and cash is made here and now, right? And it should be invested into the future in a way that it actually is put to work in a way that can help create the future. And if you don't operate in the short term in a wise and sustainable manner, of course, it will be hard to create a future for yourself and your company. And I think for any CEO and for their boards, thinking about the consequences of those trade-offs and what they should incentivize in their companies will actually be key going forward. I think personally that it comes back to their purpose, why they are in business in the first place, and what they're promising their shareholders and owners, and actually what their owners have told them to focus on in the first place.
And again, it returns to the issue of vertical development. And I have the advantage of having read your book, and I know that the book contains exercises for leaders to try to induce more long-term thinking, imaginative exercises, thought experiments. So again, it speaks to the importance of kind of removing people from the putting out fires in the day-to-day business environment, education, giving them the freedom and the latitude to expand their thinking and their horizon to what may affect their children and their children's children.
Yeah. And that's a really powerful exercise that you're referring to, that I run with the companies that I work with and their leadership teams and their boards, where I actually ask for them to imagine the future that they want for their children and grandchildren to live in. And when they get in touch with that future, something happens, because they see that what they do today has an impact on the future of their own family members. Then suddenly something drops, you know, they realize that they can actually have an impact. So it's actually a really powerful exercise, shortly described. Yeah.
So we're going to close out pretty soon. If you have any questions, this is kind of your last chance for this particular webinar. So please, feel free to communicate. Leon says, on the note of arts and sustainability, I have a friend who started, this is the Stichia company using NFTs to fund sustainable startup solutions. Fascinating how they combine tech, art, and impact. And I'm getting from this that there, and other comments as well, that there's a lot of interest in this confluence of art and sustainable business, that somehow, art and creativity can help provide the narratives, shape the stories that can, allow this to kind of take root culturally. Yeah. It's not a focus of your book, but it does seem to touch a nerve with people. Yeah. So it could be something worth exploring more. One question that comes to my mind, and it might be too semantic, is you hear a lot about stakeholder capitalism, and that's the wave of the future, according to the Business Roundtable and, the US CEOs, big Fortune 500 companies, that's what they're saying the future is, at least. So where does the idea of stakeholder capitalism fit within your framework? Is that better business? Is that regenerative business? Is it outside that framework?
No, it's actually incorporated, but I don't highlight it specifically. What I'm pretty much saying is that business as usual has a single-handed focus on the shareholder, right? Yeah. Going into better business, you add a number of other other stakeholders, like employees, like other types of stakeholders that you to some extent impact. Could even be communities, right? So those you will actually take into consideration when shaping your business and your future. When taking that into regenerative, you would actually also consider nature a stakeholder, a very natural stakeholder, and that you would want to bring back more than you take in that relationship. And I think those are that's how I've been thinking about the stakeholder perspective in relation to the three different phases or levels.
Wanted to close this out on a positive note. There are many questions that came in about how can we make senior business leaders more comfortable? How can we generate buy-in within organizations? The big one that you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation really is the money. Show them the opportunities and they'll go there. We've also talked about, executive education and imaginative exercises in art to help people kind of move from a short-term to a long-term outlook. But organizationally, are there any more strategies that you've seen be effective in changing people's mindsets, generating buy-in, and increasing the comfort level amongst senior leaders and just talking about these issues?
Yeah, seriously, this is a tough concept or a tough area, and this may be one of the keys actually. And unfortunately, there is no easy answer. I would say the big picture answer is that this goes back to the individual capacity and mindset of the individual person. And for each and every individual person, you have your own shadows, you have your own recent beliefs, you have your own value system, you have your own reason why not to change and why to keep on doing what you're already doing, because you're in your comfort zone, right? And before that is stretched, before that is questioned, either from you as a person or from the outside world that you're interacting with, nothing will happen. So this is a journey that is equally important on an individual and team and organizational level as it is on a societal level. And I believe that the mechanisms on the different levels are different, but it goes at the heart of what we believe about ourselves to be true and what we believe is important. And it's not until, I believe, we feel we can connect with that future self that we really have within us. It's not until then that we can realize that we want to change because it's important to us. And I think that's where we need to get to.
That's great. I actually do want to ask one more question, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Ben.
Before we end. When I wrote about this talk on LinkedIn, I locked on one phrase that I think describes you and your work very, I think it describes it well, which is pragmatic yet inspiring. And obviously you're not deluded about the difficulty of this journey and the stakes of it. And you hear, a lot of apocalyptic headlines, but clearly there's something that inspires you, some hope or some possibility or potential that is animating you now. So can you go a little bit more into that? Like what keeps you going? What keeps you hopeful and inspired?
I think it goes a bit back to my personality, the way I cope with things, the way I view the world, and that it tends to be with a positive view that the capacities that we have can actually enable change. And we have created this mess, so let's clean it up and let's build a better future. I think that's where it sort of comes from. Does that answer your question, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the book has a number of different frameworks people can use to kind of turn their inspiration and passion into an organizational program for change. So I would encourage people to look more deeply into that. And thank you, Mario, for sponsoring this conversation. Thank you, Elisabet, for being here. Thank you to everyone who stayed on, everyone watching this recording later. And I look forward to the next session. And I think there is some wrap up that you have, Elisabet.
Well, I think the wrap up is just a huge thank you to everyone who has been with us today, and that we will actually be back from Mario's side with some more information about the sources, the recording itself, and a few other goodies. All right, that's it from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.